All right, it is my pleasure.
Let's just gather at one
to introduce you. I think we all have the privilege, hopefully we have the privilege of knowing Rabbi Sarah Bassin, Associate Rabbi at Temple Emanuel. Rabbi Sarah Bassin, Associate Rabbi at Temple Emanuel, formerly Executive Director of the New Ground Fellowship. Sarah is an alum of the ROI community. Look at all of these wonderful rabbis. Sarah, I'll start with you.
Okay.
Because we know how. Hi, everyone. My name is Adam Greenwald, and I get the pleasure of introducing my friend Sarah Bassin. Rabbi Sarah Bassin is Associate Rabbi of Temple Emanuel in Beverly Hills. She's formerly the Executive Director of the New Ground Fellowship. In 2013, the high school curriculum she developed as part of that got named by the Governor of California as, was it the best faith-based initiative in California of that year, which is pretty remarkable. Sarah is an alumna of many innovation communities, the ROI community, the Joshua Venture community. And just on a personal note, and I've said this to you before, Sarah is for me the ultimate in the LA community for me of inter-denominational partnership. I am so lucky that when I have somebody who comes to me who says, I'm looking for a great Reform rabbi, that Sarah is my first phone call. And when she has somebody who comes to her who says, I might be looking for something in the conservative movement, not that really anybody ever says that anymore, but if they were, she might send them my way. And I am so grateful for a city of colleagues where we are less interested in denominational turf and more interested in helping people find wonderful guides on their journey. And so I'm grateful to have you as a friend, I'm grateful to have you as a colleague, and I'm really very lucky to get to introduce you to this group of people, and I'm looking forward to learning your Torah.
Thank you, Adam. So first of all, it's a delight to have you guys here. The reason I wanted to do 2 sessions and to do 2 smaller sessions was to make sure that we could have space for discussion and for people to workshop through things that they might be facing in terms of Makhloket, L'Shem Shamayim in their own communities. So just a couple of words about the through thread of my Torah and coming from New Ground, this joint Muslim and Jewish organization, to coming to a more traditional job within a synagogue. The main emphasis of New Ground, a Muslim-Jewish partnership through change, has nothing to do with political transformation and has everything to do with creating more resilient relationships and shaping how we engage in conflict. To help people understand that conflict is as New Ground says, a natural and inevitable part of any relationship. And indeed, it's actually the only thing that can push us forward to become a better version of ourselves. What's difficult is that in our society today, whether we're talking interreligiously, interculturally, or intra-religiously, we engage at a cultural level with conflict in a totally different way, where we are entering into moments of conflict seeking validation. We are entering into moments of conflict not with the idea that we can grow or that we can transform, but we are looking for somebody to show or to prove that we are right. And it is that fundamental disposition that I see as my rabbinic mission outside of the pastoral and whatever. That is my rabbinic mission to transform, is that we stop seeing conflict as a threat. We stop seeing conflict as something that can harm us, and to see it as an opportunity for growth. So what I want us to do today, or what we're going to spend some time doing, I want to hear what you guys want or hope to get out of this session, with that as the frame. I'm going to speak a little bit about a program that I've built within Temple Emanuel, but focus much more on the strategy and structure that underlies it rather than the details of the program, so that hopefully we can glean different things, not that you have to replicate this exactly, but that you can think about how you might apply those principles within your own communities. And I'll just let you know in advance, a heavy focus is going to be on facilitation and on the way that we need to facilitate in front of groups that's probably a little bit more strong-handed than we're used to as rabbis. And then the end part, what I'd like us to do is kind of work through our own case studies with each other and to model strong-handed facilitation in that way. So let's start by asking what you guys are curious about or struggling with. Don't give me your whole context of your congregational or life story, but just give me a word or a sentence of something that you might be wrestling with that you're bringing to the table.
So I said this to you earlier, I teach for the Melton program. And in the past year, it has been Melton has a flat no politics agenda, but in the past year, it has been increasingly difficult to keep political feelings out of the conversations between impassioned adults.
Okay, and also you kind of articulated like a sense of politicization of the non-political event. Okay, good.
And I am specifically the facilitator of that.
Great.
I'm Sharon. We're going to have to leave early to pick up our kids from their Ramah bus, so I apologize.
Totally.
I just got back from a 4-day encounter intensive in Ramallah and Bethlehem and East Jerusalem, and it was shattering. And I mean, most Israelis and most American Jews have no idea what's going on in Area A. I have to figure out how to talk about that in the community in a way that people can hear.
Great. Okay. Good, yeah.
So, I guess it's back to the sort of general no politics on the pulpit issue. You know, I don't want the rabbi to talk about politics, even though I try to frame it as, even social justice is scary to a lot of people in my congregation. So I try to just frame it in terms of Jewish values and whatever, but you know, sometimes I actually do support a proposition or a piece of legislation, and then they think you're not allowed to do that.
Okay, so almost a base education of what is or is not acceptable. Okay.
The hardest thing for me to talk about is how not to be agitated by the most extreme and strongest views of conservatives. Their zealotry is so high, I'm tempted to, I fly into zeal too much, counter zeal.
Great, so a rootedness for ourselves and in dealing with the extremes. Good. Yeah.
I'm Adam. I feel like a lot of times my biggest pulpit is social media, and I feel like I know how to diffuse conflict better when I'm face to face with somebody than when the conflict starts to erupt in a thread. Okay. And then how do I apply the skills I know in person to the online space?
Great.
So for me, I'm really focused on sort of preemptive stuff, being a new rabbi in this congregation that I already has a rabbi there who's cultivated a really like sort of progressive but thoughtful culture. Like, how do I preemptively prepare for conflict in the sense of like, you know, how do I speak? How do I carry myself? What do I preach? Like, how do
you lay the groundwork to be able to deal with conflict arises?
Exactly.
Great. Okay, good. Yeah.
Sarah, you know me because you've been at the prison. I'm Moshe Halfon. I'm the chaplain at the California Institute for Women. And all I would say is that, like all of you, I don't have a regular pulpit. Ironically, at the women's prison, I'm able to talk about politics and they all agree with me.
Right.
And because the women are very liberal, at least in my congregation. But the issue of disagreement is very powerful. It's an oppressive environment in the sense that there is no violence allowed, although it happens. But it's really, she took my radio, or I can't stand her because she didn't like my girlfriend.
So yours is more in the interpersonal space
but it's
rather than
interpersonal
political
stuff
space.
that boils up to the surface.
Great.
Constantly.
Okay. Good. Thank you. Yeah.
I'm going to use this material and what you present for study.
Thank you.
So we're working in an educational setting, so in a school, trying to figure out at least the setting that we have, and you know that we're in this Senate Temple's day school, which is now a minor school, so big C conservative synagogue, but a small C conservative values set, and so how do we address those issues by educating and giving students an opportunity to kind of learn the sides without having to put forward any
Great, and we can bring up the example also of the exchange and how that kind of
Right,
works.
exactly.
Any other last things? Yes?
Just the idea of like creating questions that will actually promote lengthy discussion that I don't necessarily need to encourage answers to and that sort of thing. So creating a framework for discussion.
Great.
Yeah.
Great, okay. So, what did I do at Temple Emanuel? It's a little faded. I think our printer was starting to die on this one, but the Barrett Conversation series. I started an initiative to bring in opposing people in conversation with each other. That in any given instance, there are always at least two differing perspectives that were offered simultaneously. Again, the reason it's important for me to do this is to show that we have the ability to grow and become more resilient from conflict communication. How is this different from some of the other initiatives that put people who are in opposing stances in conversation? This was very intentionally not set up as a debate. And I'll get into some of the ground rules that we laid. But first I kind of want to talk about the culture that I had to build at Temple Emanuel first, before getting into and launching this program. And to point you guys to the greatest resource of all time. Has anybody used this from Pardes? So Sharon, could you just say a little bit about like how you encountered it or what you used it for? You've got some on your tables too.
Rabbi Daniel Roth's sister Hannah Roth is a member of Ikar, and so he came and we learned it, and I taught it in a couple different environments.
Okay, and what did you find useful about it?
Just the kind of chilling upset of the Hillel Shammai paradigm of, artful conflict and the reality that even there violence could erupt, and the possibility of like what does it really take to keep conflict generative rather than painfully disruptive and bloody.
Right, so we're all able to point, we've got these basic and easy texts, the Elu Ve'elu, we've got Makhloket L'Shem Shamayim, we've got look at these minority opinions that we hold, but we also have this sub-thread in our text of conflicts really turning violent, of Hillel and Shammai not having Makhloket L'Shem Shamayim, but slaughtering each other, right? So there's a sense of there being a real delicate culture of how we engage in conflict and how easily that can turn into a switch of that turning violent or problematic. So we're not going to get heavily into text today, but I want you to know this is a fantastic resource, and even as a benefit, I just re-downloaded it yesterday, and when I downloaded it, I got an email from Amy Eilberg, who said hey, I'm happy to help you with these resources in any way. So you can have a person to consult with on how to bring these into your congregation. The other thing, and this is at the top of your resource list here, this is kind of the one that we're going to go through. It's really just my stream of consciousness listed on a piece of paper. The Barrett Conversation, Competing Visions of Israel, J Street, and the Settler in Conversation.
You have more of those?
There should be at least 5 on each table, but yes, I've got more of those. Yeah. They're everywhere. That's the actual video of the event that we did that had about 300 plus people there, and the most contentious of the Barrett conversations that we led, right? To have the number 2 of J Street and to have the spokesperson for the Jewish community of Hebron in the same space, and for them to model a constructive disagreement. Yeah.
You said you had to first prepare your congregation?
Yes.
Are you going to talk about that?
Yes.
Okay.
So let's move directly into that. Framing and building support. So skip over these Jewish texts. They're there for your resources, but it's down here, framing and building support on that page. So building the buy-in. So I can't tell you, how every rabbi gives one sermon. The one sermon that I give over and over is to have humility in conflict, and to recognize that you might not always be right, that somebody else might have a point to make, right? I give that sermon in 1,000 different forms. People know that is my Torah, right? So when they come to me with frustration about something that I've done, or a speaker, right, it's a little bit of what Rabbi Saperstein was talking about, of that's the trust that they have in me. right? That's the Torah that I preach, of the Torah of the importance of conflict and the importance of humility in conflict. As I was starting to think about building this speaker series out, I went to the board and I brought this goal of, we're dealing with a culture of echo chambers, right? We're dealing with this problematic idea of an inability to engage with ideas that are different. I, as a rabbi, want to push that. Please bring to me your ideas of difficult conversations that you think is important for our community to have. So one of my congregants actually was the person who brought me that settler from Hebron. There's no way from my own networks, right, that this is the person that I would have interacted with. So again, that kind of built up a degree of trust by engaging congregants who would naturally find themselves predisposed to disagreeing with my personal politics. I also engage the community in articulating what are the red lines that we want to draw, right? Yes, we want to have difficult conversations, but are there lines that we are not willing to cross? And the line that Temple Emanuel articulated, right, we haven't codified it anywhere, but the board conversation that we had was our line stops at inviting people who directly advocate for violence against us. Wow. Well, that gives me a whole lot of leeway in the people that we actually invite into our space. And, you know, Rabbi Geller has had, you know, she's pushed a lot of the boundaries before I got to Temple Emanuel. I can't tell you how much shit she got for some of the speakers that she invited that represented, you know, a more left-wing perspective that was in line with where she aligned. I have not gotten any sort of negative feedback yet.
It's coming.
But, I mean, I've pushed the boundaries with some of these. The difference is that I've always put them in duos, right? So there's a sense of there being some level of balance. The next thing, in addition to laying the culture, is the preparation and how you speak about the program. It was very important for me to let people know that they were going to be uncomfortable, and that was the point, right? To show that, yes, we value conflict at the theoretical level. Look, Hillel, Shammai, what does that actually mean? It means that you're going to sit there and you're going to hear things that are going to make you squirm. So get ready for that. That's part of this generative process of engaging in conflict. So again, you can't totally read it, but it's built into the fated materials of like, you are guaranteed to hear things that will make you uncomfortable. When you set up expectations, people are less inclined to get angry at you afterwards. What's the next thing? The other important thing was about laying the groundwork with the speakers themselves. And when I extended the invitations, I made sure that they understood that this was a moment to model constructive conflict, not only a moment for them to preach their Torah, right, or for their point to be heard. So in setting that tone with them, I also set it up for them to help me as the facilitator in those moments of conflict, of somebody bursting out and cheering or whatever, that they could help reinforce the culture of what we were trying to build, right? In the settler conversation, a woman started exploding and, you know, clapping and saying, yes, like, settler guy, you're doing a great job. And he was the one who actually stopped her first before I could even chime in and said, I understand that you agree. I thank you for your support. I want to respect the ground rules that Rabbi Bassin has set. So when you build their buy-in of what you're trying to create, it can help reinforce that culture. And it also shifts what they're trying to do. It helps them try to talk to each other rather than speak to their bases and score points. And again, that's what's become the default in moments of difficult communication, is like the audience matters. And if you set the goal up for like purporting your ideas, right, then it's about speaking to your base, not about actually engaging with each other. And then I made sure that the speakers would meet beforehand so that they would have just a small opportunity to humanize and build rapport with each other to hopefully lessen tension a little bit on stage. So nothing terribly groundbreaking there. Any questions or any sort of pushback or feedback or like, come on, does that really work, or anything so far? Yeah.
For Yom Kippur, I've invited Rabbi Melissa Weintraub to come and try to do some dialogue amongst people what I worry about is that the people who are gonna come are the ones who don't need to come. You know what I mean? Like, the people who are particularly, let's say, on the right, will probably never come. Is there any way to encourage them to show up?
Is yours in response to her? Okay. So I use the language of spiritual stretching, right? Of, again, like emphasizing the generative purpose of discomfort. And it's not something that you only do in a sermon. It's something that you do in your sermons, something that you do in the boardroom. It's something that you do in the marketing. You have got to hammer this message home in terms of the talking points. And like make them feel proud that they're making themselves uncomfortable, right? Like make them feel like they're accomplishing something by making themselves feel uncomfortable. Yeah.
I don't know. I think the big elephant in the room, if I had a full-time congregation, and I do have a pulpit for high holidays, they've already made clear, no politics. I mean, global warming, it's not a political discussion, but for them it is. But the big elephant in the room for all of my colleagues is that they still think, and congregations still think, that because of the nonprofit issue, you can't talk. I mean, what you've done is very valuable because you said it's not on the pulpit, it's not, I'm not going to just say my opinion, it's not who the speaker is who's like forced about it, but you put it on the side. You said the congregation is sponsoring a forum on X and it will be a discussion, and that's very different than
preaching. That's true. That is 100% true.
But I just want to say, you can get up on the pulpit and preach a position. You just can't, openly endorse candidate X over candidate Y.
Without question, right? And I think that there's
still going to get fried.
Some useful education around that. Again, I think like the stronger the framing though for this engaging with disagreements, the groundwork that you lay for that.
And you're right, you're doing it not just over politics, but over a synagogue board issue.
Right. So let's go to the event itself. This is the part that people skip over so frequently, which is the importance of really laying the ground rules and the groundwork, right? It's like, okay, we're all here, we want to learn something, everybody be nice, okay, here are our speakers. That's not enough in dealing with really volatile issues. You have to do a number of things in order to build the buy-in of the community and to set the culture. So first and foremost, remind them what the ultimate purpose of them to be there is, which is that conflict is a natural and healthy and inevitable part of relationships. And indeed, it is the only thing that makes us grow. If you want me to send you that language, I will, right? Natural, inevitable, and healthy part of every relationship, okay? So emphasize that at the very beginning. Again, pat them on the backs for making themselves uncomfortable. Tell them they are going to feel uncomfortable. And then when they experience that discomfort, it causes them to feel less riled up because they understand and expect that to happen. Lay the ground rules for the tone, right? We want this to be about understanding the other's points. This is not about cheering on your own side. So we will not tolerate any cheers or any boos. That is not what we are here to do. If, and give them permission for this, if it becomes too difficult for you to be in this room, please take a moment to step outside, regain your composure, and we welcome you back in the room as soon as you are ready. Don't make them feel bad for that. Offer that as an invitation and welcome them to remove themselves so that they can emotionally come back and participate in. It also gives them an out if they really need it, okay? And then the final thing, ask for their consent to all of these ground rules, right? Take a moment and say, here's what I just laid out, right? No yelling, no booing, stretching to understand a point that you disagree with, agreeing to be uncomfortable. Are we all on board with this? Can we all consent to this?
Can anybody say no?
Listen, if they say no, that's the moment they step out. I had at this settler conversation, there were people who got up and walked out at that point, before the speakers even started. Great. They weren't prepared to have that conversation, right? They weren't prepared to have that conversation.
Right.
That's exactly right. They came in for a different purpose,
Right.
and we said that purpose is not welcome here. The importance of that nodding is that it's going to cause the audience to self-police, okay? So again, when some of the cheering did start to break out, I, as the facilitator, didn't even have to do anything because the speaker took care of it, and I saw the woman that she came with next to her put her hand over her hands, right? Like, no, don't clap. That's not what the tone is. Okay, so you want to create a culture where everybody else is bought into that, and worst case scenario, security, right? And let them know that. Like, if you are unable to control yourselves, we will ask that security comes and removes you. When you set people's expectations up, then everybody who agrees with that person isn't going to get angry that that person was kicked out because they violated the terms of the community's agreement. I cannot express how important the ground rule laying is and how often we just go past it. Yeah.
Does it seem like that ground rule laying is dependent on having a program where there's two sides? Because I could imagine if you just had one speaker and it was, if you disagree, step out of the room, and if you can't step out of the room, I'm going to remove you, is going to feel like differently controlling than if there are...
I mean, potentially, right? Like, this is a limited structure that we've set up. I can imagine using different language of, we have invited this person into our home. You will be uncomfortable. If that is the case, please do the following, right? Yeah.
I mean, I guess kind of attached to that is, we are moving into a territory for which there isn't really a moral second side. And how do we have these conversations? How do we have this duality when there is no moral second side?
Okay, so I think there's still value to having a conversation, even when there is not a moral second side, because there's a value to understanding those ideas.
But that's that question of if you disagree. I mean, we're not going to bring in someone who actively wants our destruction. So in that case, there's no second speaker.
Thank you, Sharon.
There's no second speaker to bring in. So I mean, kind of building on that, how do you have this conversation when there's no debate? How do you say if you don't agree? Like, I think that piggybacking on Adam's question.
Do you guys have some ideas to generate here?
See, it's aggravating because we often talk as the sermon giver.
Right.
And we're not, I'm incapable of presenting the settler's arguments.
Mm-hmm.
So that is very frustrating. I mean, my championship speech of all times when I spoke against death penalty was to have 50 people get up and walk out.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that was a win or a loss.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't feel good.
Mm-hmm.
I think so. I don't know if this answers your question, but I think sometimes it's important to go below the rhetoric to the feelings. Like the people who were marching, in Charlottesville with their flames and everything. I mean, I don't condone anything that they did, but I think I can understand what David Saperstein was talking about, that they feel like they're losing their identity, their country, and all that, and they're angry, and that's what Trump is speaking to. And understanding that anger and that fear.
Mm-hmm. So
it's not about moral equivalency, it's about...
That's great. So another thing that I'll throw out of, like, when there is something that is just hard and we disagree with or whatever that's up there, you can also be the straw man as the facilitator and to articulate, like, how do you respond to the criticism of that, right? And to do your best to put out the argument that, like, people are feeling and are raging with, and, like, they're sitting in that audience and they need that question answered. You as the facilitator, it matters how you present it, right? It's not like, well, why do you, right? It's like, there's this criticism that's out there. I want you to speak directly to that. People can reject what they say, right? But then they at least feel like, okay, my feelings have been entered into that space up there.
Well, let me respond to Adam's question again. I think you could do the same kind of speech. It might be different in which you would say, if you disagree with the speaker and it's only one viewpoint, maybe it's the settler, maybe it's Arthur Waskow. If you disagree with the speaker, disagree respectfully, and listen to what they're teaching, because hopefully they're going to teach something, give them some Torah in it. But the problem still is not what happens there on that day. It's, I heard congregation member, I heard the board member, president say he agrees that all the Arabs should be killed. And I heard this guy say that, and then they can't stand each other. So it's either way you do it, there's gonna be fallout.
Right.
But you make sure that it's civil.
So let's get into the actual moderation.
They're not gonna invite somebody to their kid's bar mitzvah.
Okay, right, fine. So we've talked about the ground rules. Let's talk about the actual moderation. You've got to set it up that you have the permission and the ability as a facilitator to interrupt them, okay? I can't tell you whether it's at a lecture at HUC or like expert speakers coming in and speaking to a class or like people coming in the room. They go off on soliloquies and people get bored. It is your job as the facilitator to steer the conversation, and it's something that we shy away from because we don't want to interrupt. So give yourself at the beginning the permission to say, I want to let everybody know, and Mr. Speaker included, like I apologize in advance for interrupting. I want to make sure to get to the questions that are on everybody's mind. And that way, when they start on their talking points, they're not actually engaging with the other people or the other perspective that you need. You can steer them back to the points that you want to make. You as the facilitator have to feel comfortable in doing and making those interjections. You also need to be comfortable and aware of your own biases and your own frequency of interjection. It shouldn't scare you away from doing so. But again, I'm just going to use this J Street and Settler conversation. I was much more in line with the J Street guy than I was with the Settler and Hebron. Okay? So with that as the premise, I was very much aware of how much I interjected, particularly with the Settler. It's also true that the Settler got a little bit more riled up, got a little bit more angry, and there was a time in that conversation where he was starting to get so impassioned that spittle was flying out of his mouth. In that moment, I just said, Yishai, 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 until he stopped. You'll notice that my demeanor did not escalate to his. It brought him back by virtue of modeling that you, in contrast, are going over the top. So I'm going to hold a quieter and comfortable space and just let you know that you're starting to veer off, and I want to bring you back. We learn this non-anxious presence when we do clinical pastoral education, right? We don't often apply it in these facilitation moments. It's extremely important, especially when moments get heightened. The worst thing that you can do is start flailing or screaming or matching the level of rhetoric that you're trying to combat. So the calmer you are, the more likely you are to be able to rein that back in. It's really counterintuitive. And then don't shy away from pointed questions. Like I said, how do you respond to that criticism? And then the kicker at the end, right, as Rabbi Saperstein noted, make them find something that they share in common with the other person. J Street and the Settler, they're like, you know what, I'm willing to concede that the other guy believes that he is doing what is best for the Jewish people. He is not a demon, he is not out to destroy us. I disagree with that of every fiber of my body, but I do believe that he has his notion of the best interests of the Jewish people in mind. Great. So those are some of the principles. Again, it's heavily focused on some really pragmatic and strategic and sometimes manipulative things. But these are not things that I think that we're really taught so much in our schooling. These are things that I got specifically from Newgrounds that I never thought would be so applicable when I got to the congregational setting, but they really were.
So you mentioned red lines in terms of violence. Mm-hmm. Are there red lines in terms of whom you would actually invite? For example, would you ever have a neo-Nazi come and speak with somebody on the other side?
Well, so according to the red lines of Temple Emanuel and what they've articulated, as long as that person is not actively articulating violence, then they would be within the realm. Practically speaking, not yet. Okay? Practically speaking, not yet. One of the things that we tried on here, the Barrett conversation, the BDS one, this was supposed to be a conversation about the Jewish community thinking about how we strategically engage with boycott, divestment nations. I intentionally in that first of all, that conversation didn't happen because the Jewish community and the participants who would have been the appropriate representatives were not ready to air the dirty laundry around it yet. Like they weren't ready to have that conversation publicly, right? We pushed too far on that one. So that was a conversation that we replaced because it wasn't going to be able to be an honest conversation where people weren't just going to get to their talking points. Fine, so we pivoted, right? What was also true in that conversation is that we recognized that Jewish Voices for Peace which is a pro-boycott, divestment, sanctions organization, at that point was not something that our community would have been able to hear. That they needed to hear the array of responses of how do we engage with BDS when it makes us uncomfortable, not is there value to BDS yet. So there are greater limits that I imposed than what the community gave me permission to do, out of recognition of we need to build this muscle of resilience further before we dive into those things more in depth.
I was just thinking about how gender plays a role in all of this. Like you as a facilitator, as a woman, dealing with
Mostly old men.
potentially a lot of screaming, mansplaining men. Like, I mean, how does that play itself into your calculations?
When you say Ishai, 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 that's my mother talking.
Interesting.
I mean, I have to say, and it gives you power. I don't think I can pull that off.
I don't think I could.
It's an interesting question. I mean, we don't need to turn this into a conversation around like gendered bima presence, but in general, I think I have a much more masculine pulpit presence than I do a feminine pulpit presence. Like that's just the default in terms of the style of communication that I learned, augmented with non-violent communication. So I will say the J Street Settler conversation was a moment where I was like, you know what, shit, I'm good at this. Like, I'm owning that this is a skill that I have developed more than other people, and I have an expertise in this. So it was much more a matter, I think, of personal confidence than it was of, like, I'm 30 years younger than these men that I'm facilitating, and they're going to stomp all over me. Yeah, just cheering. Yeah.
That was a 10.
He had an actual message.
Yeah.
That was a 10.
Oh, a 10, okay. Good.
But I will also, I'll say, I mean, you can't help your gender, you can't help your expertise, like you can't help your training, you are who you are. And I feel like with you, Sarah, you've been very good at sort of like owning your abilities, owning your talent, and just going from there, right? Like everybody has a different way of navigating conflict, right? When we're in the thick of it, or when we have the opportunity to step back and really set something, like set the table well. But I think that we do the best that we can, and we use the tools that we have to really create constructive conversations. So.
Yeah, and just to follow up very shortly, I mean, I think the flip side is that as for the male colleagues out there, how to have the awareness of when we're overstepping in moderation and when we're understepping is also part of the conversation.
Right.
It's a liability sometimes for them.
Right. Okay, so I'm looking at these things that people mentioned in the beginning of what they really want to address. What I'd like us to do is use the last 10 minutes to do a strongly facilitated moment of a case study. So who has a really pressing issue that they're like, please, dear God, I need the help of 10 of my colleagues on thinking through this and how to engage in conflict in my community? Somebody be brave.
Wait, I'm sorry, I was...
You have a moment of like, I need my colleagues' feedback on how I'm managing or engaging in conflict in my own situation that you want to present and get feedback from your colleagues.
I want feedback on the social media piece.
Okay, great. So give us a specific example. We're going to do this shortened version of the case studies problem, okay? And I'm going to model heavy facilitation in this. So Adam, you have 1 minute to describe this problem. And give a specific scenario about how you did respond and how you want feedback.
Up until last year, I had respected my institution's policy, which asked me not to post explicitly political posts on social media. With the election, I informed my boss that I would no longer be observing that policy, and with some chagrin, Brad said, no, do what you want. And I have been posting fairly consistently over the course of this year, reflections on things that feel deeply uncomfortable, and I consistently get an 80-20 response of Yasher Koachs to how dare you rabbis.
On your own Facebook?
Hold on. This is
Right.
not for interruption. He's going to explain the
So,
problem first.
saying you should not be presenting this way, you're not thinking of it this way, and sometimes constructively, and quite often in a more ad hominem sort of
Okay.
way.
Great, thank you. Let's ask Adam clarifying questions. And by clarifying questions, I don't mean, why don't you? I mean, or have you tried? I mean, tell me more about.
Tell me more about the 20% who are like,
Often there are alumni of my Introduction to Judaism program who are responding back with feelings of hurt or anger or disappointment.
Is this your personal Facebook page or is it directly linked to AJU?
This is my personal Facebook page.
So the policy before had been not to post it on your personal Facebook page?
The policy had been not to post in any way on social media explicitly politically, and I don't post on the Introduction to Judaism page, but I do post on my own page.
Other clarifying questions? Yeah?
Do the posts promote positive dialogue and conversation amongst the people that are responding to it? Or as a follow-up, what is your incentive for posting?
Great. So in the context of clarifying questions, what is your incentive for posting would be a great place to start.
Something between what I feel like is rabbinic duty and just human duty at this time to be saying what I feel, and something about, if I'm being really honest, personally getting stuff off my chest. It is helpful to put it out in the world rather than stew on it.
Great.
I'm wondering, what is it that you hope, are you frustrated, angry, are you excited about the conflict, are you feeling that people are attacking you? What exactly is bothering you about this situation?
It's a great question. I am okay with people having conversations there. Sometimes I don't want to play host to some of these ideas that feel beyond the pale, that feel beyond the two sides that I'm at this point comfortable seeing. So why does it have to live on my social media presence?
So thank you. We are going to move out of our clarifying questions, and Adam is going to fully shut his mouth at this point, not respond to anything. And we are going to offer things that we have as feedback. Is somebody's
Yeah, it sounds like
radio
someone's cell phone
happening?
is turning into a radio.
Maybe, I don't know.
Is it yours?
No, it's outside.
It's outside, really?
Is it?
Yes, it's
Grateful
I
Dead.
think they're.
Well, Grateful Dead is awesome.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Is your phone turned into music?
Okay, so let's speak to Adam in terms of advice that we have. Adam is going to respond after. He's not going to say anything right now. Suzanne.
Okay, so I'm just wondering if you have set any ground rules for people responding on your page. Like, happy to hear the other side, but not.
Great.
And I think one of those ground rules would be if the comment is negative or, it is not for the sake of heaven, I will delete it. And put that right in the post of, if the comments are derogatory, they will be.
Well, I think we've answered the question, but there's two different points, but the first one is, what's in your contract at the place? I thought that was the problem. You were concerned about.
That isn't the right.
But the problem is the 80-20. That's how to respond to people on the page. But I would first, want to clarify, what is my separation between my job and my personal life?
Great.
Well, some of the posts are going to be more agitating than others, and it may be that for you in your position, it might be helpful to think about posts that are focused. My guess is it's all the political rhetoric, the anti-immigrant and all that, so posts that humanize those who are vulnerable are going to be harder to for the other side, so to speak, to attack. And you're doing the service.
Perhaps too, I'm looking back at my notes from Rabbi Saperstein, some of those, if you want to post a position and you do it from a point of view of personal experience, perhaps people will respond to that a little gentler you know, if they don't think that you're just preaching at them so much. I mean, you're a great preacher, there's a place for that, but if that's not the response you want, consider some of those points that he made about how to make your sermon more impactful, that makes people think in a different way.
I just want to say that I've also struggled with what to put on my Facebook page and what to share with like my friends and to get something off my chest. I heard you say that, and like, while I'm frustrated as an individual, like as a potential leader, I don't want to make, I don't know what, I just don't want to, some things are shared with friends and then some things are shared with the community, and I'm also discerning that line as well.
And that comes from setting your privacy to certain levels, and some posts only get seen by, you can have a group of close friends, and sometimes that can help us be human, because we have to be human, but sometimes there are certain comments that we need to get off our chest, but don't need to go to those who we have a professional relationship with.
So with that, Adam, tell us a little bit about what you're thinking about or what this input is getting moving in your mind.
So I'm appreciative of the input and the good questions. I am particularly thinking about what you said, Sarah, about red lines and defining red lines, and that was echoed in a few of the comments back that said what actually is inbounds and out of bounds, what counts as, if you're gonna play the game, then you have to expect that people are gonna disagree, and what counts as, ew, I don't want this, and how to articulate that in both the in-person spaces and in the social media spaces. This is how far I'm willing to go, and this is where my red lines are. So that's helpful feedback. Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to take a meta moment and just examine that experience. So you'll notice at the beginning, right, I did interrupt, right? Somebody who spoke, and I said, thank you. We'll get to that in a second, right? You'll also know that I reinforced the second half of your question that was getting to a place of I'm trying to understand better, rather than the first half of your question that was a little bit of a disguised suggestion, right? So I pulled out the second half and said, great, let's throw that to Adam, right? So kind of reinforcing the behavior that we want. There was also a moment of total silence where nobody had input, and I did not immediately fill that and let that sit. We all know that one as educators. But there's a real sense of security that you provide people and letting them know what to anticipate, even if what they're going to anticipate is real discomfort. So the stronger you can be in your communication of what people can expect, the more likely people are going to go along with you and be willing to follow you even through those moments of discomfort.
Yes, Carl.
Thank you.